So, who's right, Ram?
Oh, thank you. Hi, my name is Ram Ramachandran. I'm the Professor of Practice and Vice Dean at the Jindal School of Banking and Finance, for those of you who don't know me. I have two questions slash comments. Number one is around especially at the undergraduate level, if you look at U of Chicago or Columbia College and their core curriculum program, it's structured a lot like the T model that you mentioned, where I think the students generally have a better understanding of the world as compared to if you go to the Berkeleys and the UMich of the world, where you're thrown with you can pick from 200 different courses and then becomes a problem, right? Because I think it fundamentally helps students ask the question of how rather than what, right? It allows them to think from that angle. So I just wanted to get an understanding from the panel as to what you think about having that core foundation. Somebody else mentioned as well, having a core foundational program which cuts across all schools, right? So especially with Jindal, when we have these 8 schools and we talk about interdisciplinarity, but we still forcing our students to still go through their own schools' foundational programs. So that's my first question. The second one is more of a comment. When I started doing my PhD program, my area of specialization I wanted to do was on the interconnectedness between emerging technologies and how that is going to transform education, and who is going to be the triggers for those education. That would be the entrepreneurs. So when I was writing my proposals and to the different schools, they were not able to fit me to say, should you go to the School of Education? Should you go to the School of Business? Should you go to the School of Computer Science? So I had problems with multiple schools in accepting me because they were not sure whether I should be part of which school, right? So I had to find these innovative, creative, new institutions that will understand that there is an interdisciplinarity between these three that's going to change and transform education using some of these emerging technologies, right? So I think that even in the case of a doctoral programs, one needs to think about it not just as single discipline, but especially in an applied research area, it needs to be thought of in interdisciplinary area. That's my second comment. Thank you.
So I can address the question of the undergraduate curriculum. In fact, when it comes to...
Can we just take the round of questions? Can we jot
oh, okay. Sure. Oh.
Then you can address all the ones that you wish to.
Okay, just a comment. I mean, it seems almost like we're talking about a distinction between. My name is Kaveri. I teach at the Government and Public Policy School. I'm a lawyer, development studies, master's and PhD, and I teach anthropology. So it seems like the conversation that we are having is almost about the distinction between the vocational and the academic, where more or less you're training, the whole problem-solving approach, where you're training students to go out into the real world for practice, for applied work. On the other hand, the academic rigor, on the other hand, where you're training students for research or for a future in academia. And the T seems to be able to, in a certain sense, cover both. I mean, that's the formula that's been devised in Europe, for instance, where they do interdisciplinarity, but they do it in the T method, where you have both the depth and the breadth. So you're catering to both kinds of students. So any comments on that?
Directly connected with the higher universities? Okay, fine. That's better. So I am not directly connected with the higher universities and the colleges, but I am speaking as a parent. My daughter, she graduated from design from NIFT, and she got interested in philosophy because there was some kind of diploma courses going on over there on art and aesthetics in Mumbai where she was staying. And she thought that I should utilize my time just for the knowledge sake. She started going over there, art and aesthetics, and 1.5 years, she continuously went over there on weekends only, 2 days only. And finally, she was so much interested to study Buddhist philosophy that she spoke to me that I want to study something in Buddhist philosophy further. I said, okay, fine, go for that. And somebody suggested her to go for Leh, because over there you will get the basic understandings of Buddhist philosophy. She packed up everything in Mumbai and she went to Leh. Over there she studied, and then she got so much interested in this Buddhist philosophy that she wanted to continue for her master's. She started searching out any good university over here in India which could give this opportunity to study further in Buddhist philosophy. And she could not get anyone. There is only one, JNU, I think, which was providing this kind of opportunity. Finally, she enrolled herself with London, University of London, and today she is over there going for masters just to pursue her interest, her passion to study more for Buddhist philosophy. So my question is, interdisciplinary education in the colleges, it is very much required once it is giving the flexibility, opportunity to the child to pursue her dreams, to pursue her passion. It all depends on her. It depends on the student, how they take it. And in London, University of London, as you are talking about course, they had seen across, they have understood whole of her work which she has pursued while doing for Buddhist philosophy, while studying at her own, not registered with any university, not registered with any kind of UGC and all that. She studied at her own. She worked a lot on that. She prepared some papers. She presented the papers over there, and she is selected. She is selected to pursue for her passion. So this is what is required in India now. Why not to provide the opportunities to the students? Why not to provide such kind of flexibility in the interdisciplinary kind of schooling? And not only for that, for legal also, as I was listening. Now in schools, we are providing 11th and 12th legal studies. If the child has studied for legal studies in 11th and 12th, 2 years, and further if he doesn't go for graduation, undergraduate course, and he wants to go further in masters as you had planned, so this 11th and 12th legal studies course may help. So my point is only to look forward some kind of flexibility in the system. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This is just a question. Are we all assuming that students who are coming... Oh, yes, I'm Nidhi, and I'm from the Center for Policy Research in Higher Education, and this is located in National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration in New Delhi. Are we assuming that all students who are coming to higher education have had a similar sort of schooling to be able to adapt to, say, disciplinary or multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary higher education? So I don't have I'm not saying, I'm not answering, but I'm asking a question here. So how do we, because in studies, it is now higher education is expanding, but it's expanding at the back of students who are from the disadvantaged social groups, as well as from diversity of schooling aspects as well. So that's one point. And second is, would that then be a privilege? Would that be translated as a privilege? Interdisciplinary will be equated as a privilege, or a disciplinary sort of a thing would be equated as a privilege. So these two perspectives I want to see. Thanks.
Thank you. This is an observation. I very much agreed with some of the things. Sorry, I'm sorry. I'm Alice Prohaska, University of Oxford. And it's an observation that has occurred to me through all the sessions so far, and I very much sympathized and was interested in what was being said about the importance of having some disciplinary foundation before you actually embark on interdisciplinary studies. And one of the problems that seems to me to be coming through the discussions we've had, that there are various dichotomies that we've been looking at, diversity and inclusion and those sorts of things, and how to balance inclusion with excellence. This dichotomy is between learning how to study rigorously and apply the rigors of a particular discipline so that you can really be judged and examined on it, and at the same time then provide an interdisciplinary experience. It seems to me you can't be interdisciplinary until you've been disciplinary, but the question is, at what stage do you make that division? And not just for the students, although it's very important for them, but it's also very important for faculty development as well.
I'm Shashidhara here. I'm your neighbor from Ashoka University. I'm also an IISCR Pune. I'm a biologist in teaching and research. So, again, I'm sure this has already been discussed, but I joined a bit late. Higher education is mostly meant for knowledge production traditionally, although in the last post-industrialization in the last 60, 70 years is more for generating large number of human resources for a variety of jobs in the society. So I think the curriculum and the pedagogy has not changed so much from the original thinking that school education is for to know what is already known, and higher education is for the purpose of knowledge production along with the faculty. So that's where specialization was important, rigor, academic rigor was important. But now more and more students should know the what's problem to solve and also how to solve the problem. And interdisciplinarity is necessary. I think we need to think completely out of box in terms of curriculum pedagogy to address these issues, because incremental change to the existing curriculum and pedagogy may not work. I just wanted to pick up some ideas from all of you.
I'm Ravi Bhushan. I teach at a women's university in Sonipat only. It's a university based in Gohana, near Gohana. My point is, I think interdisciplinary approach, like it's not a classroom concept as such. It's a social concept basically. And given the times we are in, like in technology, I think you may like or dislike it, all our students, they practice this kind of approach. They use technology for knowing and solving problems. But my point is to come to the ground reality. Like for example, again, I'll go back to the state university, which I've been talking about since morning. Like how to implement it, the ground realities. CBCS, like with all pomp and glory and show, UGC launched it. But on the ground, it's almost a fraud, it's a flop show. It's not implemented properly, right? And it's again, like you're given a list of subjects and students are supposed to select only from that list. And again, like considerations of adjustment of timetable, adjustment of teachers' workload, all those things come into picture, right? So it's a fraud basically. My core point is, I think I'll agree with Professor Ghosh, an element of specialization is very much required, I think, as far as the higher education is concerned. Otherwise, it's going to be chaotic, like giving lot many choices this way, that way. Where is then why do you choose a subject to study per se, right? And technology, I think, can be an enabler to help people to practice interdisciplinary approach. Thank you.
To what we've heard from each of you, we've got about 10 minutes.
Okay, so my one response to, I think Kaveri raised the issue about the T model, it covers the both breadth and depth. So probably we can have more project-based learning where you are allowed to apply, and you can have guides from multiple disciplines. Instead of having a single guide, you can have guides from multiple disciplines. And I think that also pitches into what your question or your problem was, why it should be a committee with say faculty from single school. Why can't it be multiple people from different disciplines? One. And two, regarding your Mr. Ravi Bhushan's point, the problem is real about timetable. But whenever, so I am required to credit a course and I cannot do it right now, do I have or can the university provide the flexibility? Say, I want to take the course next year my credits are full, I can just walk into the class, I have time, I can audit it. I can just listen to it. It's not necessary that if it reflects on my transcript only, then I learn. I can interact outside the classroom, I can walk into the classroom and learn. If time permits, if it does not permit, then other avenues need to be found, but it builds into the regulatory framework, which Professor Gupta mentioned. It cannot happen unless regulatory framework allows that, and then the universities themselves build the flexibility to do that.
That's the problem is, the moment you codify, the moment you regulate it, like what happened with publications, the moment it was mandatory,
Yes.
we all understand. Like I disagree with the statement made in the morning, publish or perish. Right? So don't make it mandatory. See, you may not do it, but students will learn it.
Yes.
And they have been doing it. So where is the need to codify and regulate it as such? Then we teachers, please accept it, we devise our ways to manipulate it. Right? That's the ground reality of a state public university. May not happen at Jindal University, right? That's what the point is.
Thank you. Very interesting questions. First I just want to clarify, I didn't want to say that you shouldn't be doing or be exposed to a range of things. Of course you should be. But you must go through some basics. There has to be, as I think was just said, some disciplinary rigor. In addition to a wider exposure. The foundation courses that were mentioned, I think they're fascinating, but that foundation is more like what you want every human being to read. Great books, these are things you want everybody to have read in life because they're good things to read. I don't think discipline comes into it in any way, if you see what I mean. It's not about inter or multi or trans or anything. It's just these are books that everybody ought to have read in life as a great experience, and that you learn different things from them. So I think there is a case for that kind of foundation course. I think it's really a question of how you do it. It's one of those crossing the river by feeling the stones thing, because I was recently in the University of Ahmedabad, and they are doing these foundation courses in the first year on themes where they get people from completely natural sciences and humanities or social sciences to teach together. And there are things like water, urban life, energy, etc. And of course, the idea is fascinating. But these are 18-year-olds who have come from a really bad school system, and suddenly they're thrown into this. I wonder whether this is the best time or way to do it. Maybe you have to do it after 4 years, when they've been through something and they can actually understand it. And there, I think Nidhi's point is very important, that we have to recognize, I don't know how diverse the student body is here, but I can tell you I couldn't do dramatically interdisciplinary in my first year MA students because we have a really diverse student body, coming from very, very different backgrounds, some first-generation learners, some first-generation English speakers. You can't bring a very sophisticated pedagogic program immediately like that. You have to actually work it through. So I think it's something that depends on context. You need to be flexible. And I completely agree with you. For God's sake, don't regulate it.
So I think, we have talked about regulatory rethinking and how we should not be rigid. But I think we need to sort of go back and think as a student, and students think why they should do a certain degree. Why undergrad, why masters, why an engineering, and for many years in India, there was a craze for engineering and medicine. Not necessarily because people had a passion for engineering or medicine, because it was one of the a quick absorption to secure a job. So I think that's the fault line. I mean, that's where, the problem starts. You design what you see at the end of a course is a job. It has got nothing to do with any discipline or whatsoever. So I think we need to sort of, and lot of that thought process has been sort of, percolated into the way we have designed courses in universities. And we really have not been able to give it a thought, because at the end of the day, 3 years been spent, 4 years been spent, what is there at the end? A lot of rethinking about the scope of higher education and what students must do. Thank you.
So, just want to respond to the 2 points. One, you brought up about the core. So there are generally 2 models of the general education. One is the core model, and the other is the distribution model. And the core model is where, and the Columbia and Chicago are the 2, and St. John's are the 3 schools which had this kind of classical core, which everybody has to study the same thing. And Edward Said was very sort of instrumental in shaping this in Columbia, and he should have said, he said that, even if they forget all of it, they would have all forgotten the same things. So this ironic equivalence that they should all forget or learn, and that is the one model. And the other model is where, and at Ashoka we recently moved from the core to the distribution, and this is by no means a kind of a final thing like the bucket system, where you get different courses to satisfy different requirements. So you have a quantitative learning model, you have an ethical reasoning model, you have and I think, I think any kind of general education system has to be constantly revisited. It cannot be cast in stone. You have to revisit it every couple of years, because things change completely. But these are the primary 2 different models that have kind of operated. One, you have a fixed core, and the other is you get different subjects to satisfy a set number of requirements, and students have choice in which. The advantage of the second one is, of course, that you get professors excited about their research teaching those, so that obviously has that advantage, and then you have a range of things from which you can choose. And the other point I want to respond to is Dr. Shashidhara's point about research, and I think this is really interesting, because I think in India often education is generally thought of as learning, that is consumption of knowledge, and I always say that that's only half the story. The other half of education is the production of knowledge, that without producing knowledge, and this is, as we know, this was brought about by Wilhelm von Humboldt, the Humboldtian model of the research university in Berlin, the Reformed University of Berlin in the early 19th century started this model, where the university was not just thought of as a place where students went to learn, but where new knowledge was created. And I think the problem is, I think Indian universities, and it's quite, when they were set up, the main model is an 1857 model, where the 3 presidencies in Delhi, Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras, the 3 universities were set up, and it was very clear that the British did not have this model in mind. Neither did they have the Oxbridge model, which was the other model of pastoral care. They were just looking for a system through which they could certify a very large number of people fit for to work as clerks, and government servants, and that, that is the obsession with exams. Because if you are looking to certify a very large number of people in a short amount of time, the best way to brand it is through exams, and that is the model that has dominated the public universities in India for the longest time, and it hasn't really been changed. Even so many decades after independence, it hasn't been changed. And my sense is I don't have much expertise on the K-12 sort of scenario. I mostly work on the post-secondary. But my sense is things like CBSE and all are also modeled on this kind of examination model because of this clerical mindset. And I think one of the most important thing is to sort of bring research not only as a kind of postgraduate thing, but in an undergraduate level. I mean, one thing Andre Bettel really writes about this, that how do people do nothing but passive consumption, and suddenly one day in the PhD they'll start writing this amazing, thesis or discoveries. It's not possible. You must integrate production of knowledge earlier. You must get them to produce knowledge at a much earlier stage, so that this artificial binary between production and consumption does not strike you, and suddenly you've consumed all your life, and suddenly one fine morning, okay, now produce new knowledge. That doesn't work like that. Production can become a part of, earlier process. So that, I think, is a very important point. Thank you.
has been said and so many interesting questions and observations. Just picking up on something that Shoikat had just said about at least in the American system, the distinction between distribution requirements and a core curriculum. Of course, in other words, whether one has choices in satisfying different kinds of, or acquiring different kinds of competencies in ways that are left open to the individual learner versus everyone having to learn the same thing, right? So we go back to this very basic idea that Professor Prohaska had mentioned also. I mean, when is one ready for interdisciplinarity, and isn't there something that everyone should know, right? I mean, you Americans in the audience, or those who were educated in the US, will remember Alan Bloom's Closing of the American Mind in the early 1980s, and what's with multiculturalism? We've abandoned the idea that there are all kinds of important things that everyone should know, regardless of who they are and where they come from. There are all kinds of complex problems and questions that we have to keep facing in applying interdisciplinarity. Apart from all these the various practical questions that have been raised about who actually teaches, what kind of distribution of faculty resources are necessary for this to work effectively, and so on. I'm not sure that I have any very convincing answer for that, except that there are continuing problems. The last thing I was going to say was that I remember a couple of years ago giving a talk on some of the same things here, and doing a kind of quick survey of in research titles of journals that had the term interdisciplinary or interdisciplinarity, and one sees that these emerged really from the 1960s and early 1970s. Journal of Interdisciplinary History has been ticking along quite nicely since 1971. Journal of Interdisciplinary Mathematics. Nearly every field or discipline has one or more journals with the title Interdisciplinarity. And just on a lighter note, I was really tickled by coming across one called the Journal of Interdisciplinary Dental Sciences. I wondered what that might be. And I said, well, of course it's interdisciplinary, but anyway.
Making you beautiful. That could be it. Okay, this has been a really rich discussion, so I'll make a couple of points. One, I'd like to say that imposing rigor doesn't mean that you can't be critical. And I feel that no one's really talked about critical thinking that much. I don't believe you have to wait until you have your PhD to be a critical thinker. So I think that that's a very important element to bring into studying and working and research and being in the classroom. The second point is that I personally am a very firm believer in experiential learning. And this is something that, to quote John Dewey, he said that experiential and traditional learning does not mean that it has to be either or. It doesn't have to be either or. You can bring in various facets. I think one of the problems with education is that our educators don't really care about pedagogy, or they haven't been pushed much to develop a pedagogical approach. Because I believe very strongly, if you have an idea of how you're teaching, what you're teaching, what the effect's going to be, you're going to be working not just with, someone mentioned, I think, this morning about the empty vessel notion. Here we are with all these empty vessels. Students, we're pouring knowledge into them. I believe that the classroom, and I've seen it so many times, the space of learning, can be extremely exciting for students and for the teachers. It can be a place of co-learning. It can be something where new knowledge is developed, even if you're working with young children. And I think some of us have seen this in our experience. So I think that that's a very important thing. I don't think we have to wait to practice interdisciplinarity. I think co-teaching is a very good example of what you can do. And I've always had a good time with my fellow co-teachers arguing with them in the classroom. The students seem to enjoy that too. You know, where we have a disagreement with what we've come up with, how we've come up with solutions. So I feel it's very healthy to disagree with what we're doing. And finally, I just want to mention to you, Saikat, that have you been to the Riverside School in Ahmedabad? Oh, okay. It's really interesting to visit that school because this was like Howard Gardner's, you know, he used his paint box. And I'm always amazed to see what the students are doing at that school, how they're doing and how they're into education. So it's, you know, it's really interesting. I think that the reality of India is true. I think someone said it back here, that there is a question of teaching a mass program, how you can get interdisciplinarity into the program. Is it a luxury? I don't think it should be a luxury. I think that it's ended up being a luxury though, but I don't think it should be. Okay.
Just very briefly, because I think a lot has been said. And from the questions, it seems there are two sets of questions. One is about the regulatory framework, promoting or obstructing interdisciplinarity. And the second question is more about at what stage do you introduce interdisciplinarity? I think the two are connected in some ways. And I think undergraduate education is really a key space. I think we all agree that students come from very different backgrounds, very different schooling systems, and regardless of that, regardless of the range of schooling system that they come from, there is a complete unlearning that needs to take place at university. So I feel that, first of all, there needs to be more conversation across schools and universities so that there isn't this stark difference. And I agree with Kathleen that interdisciplinarity can be introduced at an early stage. So perhaps, you know, connecting school-level curriculum with university-level curriculum is important. The fact that we have so many different types of schools, so many different types of universities, the division between public universities, private universities makes this a complex problem. But that should not, you know, prevent us from having the discussion in the first place. I think someone asked whether interdisciplinarity is a privilege, and I think Kathleen pointed out that it really needn't be, but it requires some nurturing. I mean, given the history of regulatory frameworks, maybe that's not the way to start, but it is still important to have the conversation amongst academics.
Thank you very much. This has been a fantastic session. I think it makes me wonder, you know, Isaiah Berlin wrote this wonderful essay on the hedgehog and the fox, and the two literary Russian giants. Maybe then we need to find some animal in between, the hedgehog and the fox, and we'll maybe find some, and somebody will write an essay about that. So I want to give all our panelists who led us off with these very rich thoughts a very big hand. And thank you all for taking part in this session. I'm very grateful. Thank you.